Hello, everyone. So my name's Harry. I am the photographer that's sharing the multiple exposures within the Photoshop and Lightroom group. I've had a lot of people comment on them, and the feedback has been amazing. So I just wanted to first start off by saying thank you. It's hugely encouraging for me as a photography hobbyist. I've had quite a few people ask about how I create them, and that's when I came to the conclusion that I'll do this video. Um, and I wanted to kind of talk about the work that I do, and just kind of explain a bit behind these images and how I compose them, what kind of goes through my head when I'm making the image. And more importantly, which I imagine everyone is listening to this, is how I make them. So, just a bit about me to start with. So, my full time job is not in photography. My full time job is actually within advertising. So, for me, getting out on the weekends is the closest I get to this type of work. Um, I tend to do a lot of my photography in London. I tend to take my camera with me if I go to a town. I find that urban areas, urban environments tend to work best with this type of photography. You can see I don't have a lot of images that I would call my portfolio set. I would consider these ones as my sort of portfolio images. Um, I've shared this one, which has had a lot of comments, and I think this has been my most popular one so far. Um, so I actually started doing this a year or 2 years ago. So 2021 was when I did my first image, and that was when I first put this one together of Chinatown, and it was very much an experiment. I know some people have referenced Burnham Arledge, I believe, as the name I've mentioned, if I've mentioned that correctly. Um, I think I saw a sponsored advertisement from him on Instagram, and he's got very clean cut images like this. Where if I've got it available under here, so his images are very clean. They've got a very clean subject. They're beautiful. They are very tidy, I suppose, if the word that's kind of the word to describe it. Um, so he first inspired me to create a lot of these type of images. I just wanted to have a go really, and I did it by replicating one of his ones on St Paul's Cathedral, um, and that's another landmark in London. Um, and then gradually, I found I actually preferred. I would probably say my images are fairly messy in comparison. They are not as clean. That kind of just seems to be a style that I've gravitated towards as I've been messing around and experimenting over the last couple of years. So this one, in fact, its file is called censored up here because there was actually something offensive that I'm not going to share on this T-shirt that I had to get rid of when I was creating this. But I remember this day very well. I really wanted to highlight the cultural aspects of Soho itself, and it's very well known for the decoration in and around the streets, and that was something I really wanted to highlight. It was actually super busy on that day, and that was a really challenging time for me because it's not how I had envisioned that time taking photos. So I kind of expected it to be quite easy, and I suppose I kind of stumbled into this messy um, kind of creative imagery because I kind of had to try and force myself to work with this type of image, and the photos I'd taken on the day. So, as an example, this was probably one of the um, photos that I'd taken. So this is one of the images. You can see it's incredibly overcast. I was literally shooting on, I think I was actually on aperture priority actually, but you can see that there's a lot of people. Some of the images aren't even straight. It was very much shooting from the hip. And actually, when I went into Photoshop, um, my main kind of task for creating this one was aligning the images. That for me, the whole process itself going. I tend to do these on like a Sunday afternoon. um, the process is quite long, and I'm going to talk about that in this hopefully short video. I wanted to do a full tutorial on here, but they take a good 4 to 5 hours for me to do, so that would have just been too long. So I kind of wanted just to talk about some of the main things I do when I'm creating these, and hopefully it inspires some of you to do it yourself in kind of your local areas, and have fun with it. I think that's kind of the main thing I want people to take away from this is it's very much an experimental opportunity, I think, with your own photography. So street photography was something that I wanted to get into. I've actually been doing photography for not very long, maybe truly the last for probably 4 years. I've been doing it for. I've got a couple of questions just to talk about that people have asked about my setup, and I'll go through that at the end, kind of how I typically set myself up when I go on to these type of things. And now I physically go to. I find it works best when I go to my location to take my camera with me, and I'm going there to physically take these kind of photos. When I don't do that, it's typically if I'm going to like a location on as a trip, and me and my partner will go, and I will just take my camera along with me and just take photos and see what I can do. I think the recent one I shared in the group from Ely was kind of that kind of thing. So this was a dedicated trip where I physically went to try and get an image like this. I do find they often work better that way, because obviously you've got a lot more flexibility with where you're shooting and the compositions you want to have. So for this one in particular, as I said, a lot of as you can see from like the previous images that I showed, that it was very overcast. The lighting, because I was on aperture priority, it meant that I had a lot of overexposed images as well, I found, and occasionally when I was having to shoot quite quickly, I had to switch over to shutter priority, and I found that either ended up with quite an overexposed image or a very underexposed image. So there was a lot of post-processing that I did in Camera Raw before I physically started putting them together. So for this one, I did align a lot of it. As I said, I like going for quite a messy look, so I aligned these initially before then trying to purposely have I suppose, maybe the upper third completely dominated by the decoration that was around in Soho at the time, and then people were particularly the most important thing for me. So I wanted this area here to be quite visible. I quite liked the canopy and the marquee in the background, so I wanted that to be visible in this photo. But it looked strange being up here, which is why then it kind of had a slope of people down here. Had some comments to say that it was unbalanced, but equally, that's someone's opinion. That's totally fine. That wasn't the idea I had behind creating this. That was a purposely placed position there. So another thing that I liked about this one was just, as you can see, the girl, she has the red hair, she's got the red bag, she's got the red dress, and then it complements really, really well with the decoration within here. So aligning the imagery, this is a really good example of how I've tried to do that. Lining the people up, lining any kind of objects up, and then blending, and I'll go into blending in the next one. So my next image was on the Elizabeth line. So that was a new station that opened. Again, this is very different. There are a lot of different images that went into this one. This was a combination of images taken on the platform. It was a combination of images taken of the train. It was a combination of images taken with, where they had the escalators. This one, I composed like this when it came to putting the image together because there weren't actually a lot of people. It very much varies from image to image, I guess, depending on how busy the scene is at the time. So for this one, there weren't a lot of people in there, so actually what I wanted to make sure was that I had elements of the train in there. I tried to then make the people as kind of as central as possible to the image. It works really well when I find when that happens, because otherwise it's just mainly my personal preference, I guess. I find having the people dominate the image, or particularly in the center anyway, it works for me. So yeah, there was a lot of this one was probably composed of the fewer images. Typically it takes maybe around 10 to probably 30 I think is what I try to use as a base mark, but I actually think I prefer ones that tend to hover around the 10 to 15 mark. This one was probably around 10. Chinatown was around about 15 to 20, I think, if I remember correctly. And then just lastly, before we go on to kind of this, I'm going to use this as an example of how I've composed it or created this, and you can see from here. So for the Carnaby Street one, again, hugely busy day, and I actually didn't really know what I was going to come away with when I came here. I didn't really have this composition in mind, if you like, but I found that after experimenting with a couple of layers, I actually quite liked how this then turned out. There's elements here that I've duplicated, so you've got this canopy here on the right, and then also this canopy here on the left that I've then duplicated in, just to try and balance out the photo or the image, if you like. And this character here, he was actually taken in Covent Garden, on the I did on the same trip. But I actually thought he added something really, really nicely to this image. His eye contact was really nice. I loved how he had the violin on there. For me, that was kind of an eye catcher for this. And then I found that when I was putting this together, it was just missing something. And then actually, this group here in the table, I thought worked out really well for this. I've had comments on this character here about it being potentially distracting, which I get. So I think, you know, that's something I've taken away from sharing them, actually, is that just being careful of these edges as well, just for how it could distract the eye of the viewer, if you like. Other things that have inspired me for this type of thing as well, as I love kind of Renaissance style paintings. So for me, I really like the rough edges that they've got, which is another way, another reason as to why I kind of preferred this type of style. Burn of Mileage, I found it, yeah, again, beautiful images, very clean, and I really enjoy putting. I like the chaos that kind of comes putting together this kind of image where it's just slightly more messy and chaotic. Again, rough edges, very saturated. So I'm just going to start talking about the process then, before I lose anyone. So how do I start with this? So, okay, I will go on to location, and I will try and take a very large number of photos. I've gone to some places and maybe taken 25, and I've just tried to squeeze a couple of images out, or squeeze 15 images out of that to make the final picture. Other times I've taken hundreds, and I find if I take hundreds, that does give you more opportunity to pick the best images, I guess. I found the fewer I take, the harder it is to find something that I'm pleased with visually. If I go somewhere and I take loads, then actually I've just got a lot more to play with. So I'm going to kind of try and take this down overall. So here's the background layer. I've had some people ask about background layer, and not being able to see it when they make when they've tried making the images. And again, I'm massively humbled that people have attempted to try this, just from the ones that I've shared. I've been hugely grateful for that. So here's the background image. This has been edited in Camera Raw. Essentially, what I've done for this one, I wish I had the raw one to show you, but my laptop's quite old and I'm afraid that Photoshop will crash on me if I close it. So this is the first image that I've used. I liked it because it had some good. I felt that this just pulled your eye in quite nicely with the buildings on the left and the right. You had this character in the center. Initially, was going to be my main character. I thought he just stood out really nicely. I had quite a low aperture for this one. I wasn't too fussed with what was going on in the background. I just liked this person generally. I thought he was on his own, he was walking. He would actually make quite a nice character. And again, the setting itself, I thought works quite nicely as a base layer. And just to clarify, I didn't choose this as the base layer when I was taking the photo. I quite literally stumbled across this one because I took a lot, and I just figured for me this would be worked out quite nicely. So it might surprise some of you that very little planning goes into this when I'm taking photos, and it is very much a quick dirty type thing of shoot from the hip and coming back to see what you got. So then I go on for the background layers. So I'm just going to take these off before I start showing then how I've adjusted the opacity. So for me, opacity is really important, and it very much is just a it's kind of an experimental thing you need to try for yourself to see what works. Some elements are more transparent than others. Others are less transparent. It really does just go on what you're trying to show and what works for your eye, I found. So if I just take that mask off quickly, you can see, hopefully, and bring that opacity up. That's all the images. So, so this was one that I just took. I just liked how he was led against the or sat against the wall. I've changed the size of the image. So for me, what goes into this a lot is just how I blend elements of certain images together, and I'm just very much building it up slowly from the background to do it. So I'm just gonna do all of that. So that again is something to bear in mind when creating it, is if you find that you've got a certain don't feel that you have to blend the entire photo. If that's what you want to do, brilliant. I don't tend to do that for some I do, some I don't. So there's just elements of it that I've done, and then I've just played with the opacity on it. I don't find there's a hard and fast rule, but in terms of brush, you can see up here my brush opacity is super low when I come to brushing it in. Recently I tend to worry less about the brush opacity, and actually I really just experiment with what works and what I like. If I go at a lower opacity, it takes a lot longer for me to obviously brush it in. If I don't, it can be a lot quicker. So the next layer itself, again, I'm going to just do the same thing. I'm going to take the mask off, and I'm going to push the opacity up. The sign, that's all I really wanted from this. And again, lined it up, so all I'm really doing is pushing that opacity down slightly. And you can see how I'm trying to align it with the other images, adjusting the size. For me, I really wanted it to be known that it was Carnaby. I wanted it to be known and time-stamped with the Jubilee. So that was a kind of a crucial thing for me when I was, again, creating that for this image. So onto the next layer. So how I distort some of it is I will duplicate the layer and I will just adjust the size of it. That is quite literally all this is. It is no different to the layer below. It's just a slightly different size, and I've just adjusted it. You see, it's not a huge art really. Not to undersell myself, but it's not a huge. There's not a lot of thought that goes into it. It's just a lot of experimentation. Not sure if you can see that, but this is actually all this layer is I just wanted it for the house. So I wanted that bit. I wanted just something to. I quite liked the kind of like the Tudor architecture that was on it, albeit it is blurred out. It was using a. My intention wasn't to take the photo of this. My intention actually was to get these people here. But I found when I was looking at the image, I actually liked what this added slightly to the overall composition of the image and blending it in at the end, because I felt just without it, I just didn't like that blank space. I just felt like it needed something. So on to the next bit is the canopy. So in terms of the canopies, so I've used the same photo, but I've just cropped it slightly. I've moved it over, and all I really wanted was these. So again, just bringing those sections in and trying to see what they add to the final composition. This is quite literally a duplication, and I've flipped it and I've added it in this side because for me that just felt balanced. At this point I was still unsure about this character. I just felt that something needed to I wasn't too sure at this point, I guess, whether he was the right main character or not. So in terms of the subject, you see there's quite a lot that has gone into this. If I move those layers, so first one, I wanted him to be here, so I just wanted him to be central. His image, as you can see from Comet Garden, So actually, this was taken in the. I don't know if anyone's been to Covent Garden. Probably quite a few of you have. This group's about 300,000 people, but there's like a small foyer. I think there's a foyer. I don't know if it's a foyer area within Covent Garden where they do sometimes have acts and bands and things play. So he was there. So I wanted just to place him. I adjusted the opacity. I aligned it with the rest of the image and where I felt it was suitable. I covered the other man's face behind him because I realised actually at this point I didn't want him to be my main subject. So I felt if I kept him in, he would have been a bit too dominant from my point of view. And then I just wanted to try and bring the face out a bit more. I wanted to add some depth to it. I wanted to kind of add a bit of contrast to his face and also his hands and the violin. And then I continued. So this is a really tiny detail, but if you look at his violin stick here, I really hope I've said that. I probably haven't said that right. I don't think it's a violin stick. But if you watch that, I've just added a bit of blur on there because I just felt like it gave a bit of motion to him playing. And again, I've just added a bit of motion in there by copying the image, duplicating the layer, changing the opacity, and just adjusting the way it's facing. And really this is all just kind of experimental. So with this one, I just kind of wanted to, I can't actually remember what I wanted to do with this one straight away. Oh yeah, so it was just adding initially I had this concept that it'd be cool if his face was, he had almost like a different direction in his face that was slightly blurred and taken out, and it just kind of added a bit of kind of I don't really know what, just something different, I suppose. But I found it didn't work hugely. But actually, it kind of worked with the rest of his body. It just blurred it out a little bit. I probably didn't even need that layer, to be honest, but I kept it in. But this is his arm, so I wanted his arm to be kind of there. So again, it just kind of gave that illusion that it's caught mid-play. I mean, he was mid-play, but the shutter speed was really fast when I took that. I wanted to kind of capture him sharply because I really thought, initially for Covent Garden anyway, they would have made quite a nice, as a band, would have been quite a nice addition to have to it. And then I just, again, added some additional structure just to his hat and his face, just again to make it kind of stand out. I thought it was a bit too bright there, and actually doing that, I felt it just looked a bit more painterly to me. So I've called this one Noise. I'm just going to have a drink quickly. So I've called this one Noise. Noise not in the sense of like sensor noise, more in the sense of background noise. So with this one, I'm just going to take these layers off. This is where the fun bit starts from my point of view. So in terms of the main subject, I want to build the rest of the image around the main subject here. So I wanted to add some signage here. This was actually a Jubilee sign, or something. It was some decoration on the Jubilee. It was some artwork on the walls. Then I wanted to add in some background from people, just to really bring up the busyness of the scene. So again, all edited in Camera Raw before it came in here. I just, and again, lining it up with the street, which is kind of, from my point of view anyway, pretty imperative in how I like to construct my images. So this one again, it's just noise of people. It's just people walking around. That is going to just add a bit more busyness to that. I really liked this personal moment from this couple here. I thought that was a really nice element to add. For me, it just showed a lot of character, I guess, to the people that were visiting this area. So then I have got this gentleman here. Really interesting. Even the guy I was with actually at the time, when we were both I was photographing with a friend, and he actually pointed him out to me. He said, "Oh, this is an interesting character," because he was the only one in the area that I was dressed in a suit and a yellow hat. And we just started taking photos, and I found that was just the one that stood out to me that I could use, because I just felt he was almost leading the eye out slightly. And I know, I guess depending on how critical you are of other photographs, that leading the eye out of the composition is a negative thing. I do kind of agree with an element of that. I think it's good to hold the attention in the center as much as possible, but equally he just added to that busyness. It kind of added to the chaos, I guess. And I also liked how he complemented how he was looking with this person here. And then this for me is the critical bit. So they had the food court in Carnaby Street. I don't know what it was called. I didn't even realise I took the photo of these people until I had a look at my camera when I got back. I just snapped photos within the area because I felt a bit awkward taking photos of people when they were eating. I don't know if anyone has the same experience when they're trying street photography. I don't particularly like making it obvious that I'm taking photos of people, and I felt that when I was the only one in this area with a camera, it looked really obvious and it looked a bit strange. So I just snapped and then came back without really realising what I was taking a photo of. But I thought that they added just that really nice bit of depth to this image, which I think is why I actually like it so much, because I just think it really helps make it a lot more 3D, if you like. It takes you from this point all the way through, and I just think it adds really nicely. Whereas I think without it, I think when I took the photo of the violinist, I struggled to get his legs in, so that didn't really work. But also, it just felt very flat when there was nothing in the center. I'd really like to try and add depth to it as much as possible, and this just helps with that. And then I've got layer adjustments, so we haven't covered that yet, but I really like to experiment with layer adjustments, because what I've found as I've done more of these is that messing around with layer adjustments is just a really good way of splitting the image up, whether it's color toning certain areas, whether it's adding extra contrast in places, whether it is changing the color of something. Because it's non-destructive editing, it's just a really good way of just adding something different and just changing something small. I felt it was just too blue, quite simply, for my own taste anyway, and then to add in this section, I just felt like it just lighted up and it just set it apart from these elements here. Then I have duplicated it again because they were just elements that I wanted to be more transparent than others. I kind of wanted it to be a little more solid at the bottom. I wanted it to be obvious there was a table there. I wanted it to be obvious there were people here. What I tend to do when I'm creating the mask on the layer, and then I quite literally am just painting over elements to bring that opacity back. So I will start with a really low opacity, potentially, if I'm trying to do that on one layer. I will then duplicate it, and then I will then make it more opaque, and blend in a more solid area of the subject or the figure that I'm trying to paint in, or the object. And again, colored that image. And then I did something a bit strange. It doesn't, I suppose, from my point of view, however small the adjustments are, I do think they add something, because I think without it'd be very different. My personal preference, I like it with this section in. So actually all this is, again, I've just used it to lighten aspects of it. All I did here was I used the filter section and then the blur on here, the motion blur, and I blurred, I can't even remember what it was that I blurred, but I blurred it, and then I just pumped the hell out of it for saturation, and I then just used it for a bit of motion blur, just to add, again, just a small effect to it. And bearing in mind, I took this about a year ago, and the way that I edit now is slightly different, but the principle there is still the same. So I did a lot of experimentation with just general composites, just to try and get a bit more skill in my understanding of compositing and adding effects in, and that is something I now try and add on all of my newer images that I've created. So then the hue and saturation layer, again, just a little lift, taking it from a fairly flat, almost feels at this point like a raw file, because the more layers you're adding on and the more opacity you're adding, the less it's the more saturation it actually takes out. So I like to make sure that the layers are saturated because of that reason, but obviously the more you pile them on, the more the overall image has become desaturated. So for this, it's just adding that saturation back in. And again, you can see here, I've only really painted, oh sorry, not that section. Okay, here I actually have done everything. I was looking at the wrong layer. But some, I might just only add the saturation in certain areas. Again, there is really no hard fast rule to this at all. And then brightness and contrast. So you can just see how much that changes the image alone, right? Like, that's taken it from, again, quite a not so much desaturated, but it still feels quite flat. And then just changing in the brightness and the contrast. Here it's not a huge amount, but I've only added a tiny bit of contrast in there, and actually that's what I found. So blending layers. So I think this is really an important thing to, again, experiment and just finding what you like, because you can just see the differences that you can have. And obviously you can change the opacity on some of them, so I don't know what would happen if I used that and just had it slightly. I mean, that doesn't look great, but you kind of get the principle. Changing some of the opacity on some of these and just seeing what it does. That's all I've really done to try and get back here. I think that was back on offline, but I'll change that. Just seeing what it does, and just having to go and see what is nice for your own eyesight and your preference. Lastly, with Baker Street, again, I just kind of want to breeze over this one because I don't want to kind of lose anyone in this. But I found with this image, again, in terms of core layers, and this again, like, you can see how my organization changes. I generally create them like this now, so I'll have a group of background layers, put my main subject in, and then I'll fill it in with noise, and then I'll add in adjustment layers. Some images I've got a lot of adjustment layers in, some images I don't, and this is kind of an example of where I've maybe got a few more and I've actually grouped them. I've got a couple of brightness and contrast in here, color balance for the top. So for this one, sorry, wrong layer. This one, the color balance on here, I actually went for more of a bluish tone on the bottom, and then up here I went for more of a reddish tone at the top. I wanted to kind of mimic the tube trains that go through the underground, and how they had their red and their blue. So for me, they were kind of colors that I wanted to stick out. And then brightness and contrast in the center. Again, if I turn that layer off on here, you can just see what it does. Like, just look at that difference that it makes. If I turn all of these adjustments off, it's a very flat image. I mean, some people might think that actually looks okay. I much prefer where I've got this on. And then in terms of the core layers themselves, so I'm just going to take that off. I'm going to turn that off, put the main subject in. Oh, actually, if I turn that off, and that, and that, and that. And then let's get the background. So it's quite a large image, actually. I forgot how large this image was. Some of them can take up about 2 GB worth of space. So this one, I kind of started from the ground up on this one. And I'm going to take that off and that off. There we go. So very empty. The Baker Street itself was really empty, and then all I've really done is here I've just added the distortion in some of the details. I've then created more distortion. I then started to add some people in. This was taken further in on the station. I wanted this guy to be a bit more prominent. I quite like the shadow. I liked the highlights on his coat. And then you can just see this one, I've kind of added more noise first. I wasn't really sure with this one. There was a lot of experimenting that went on with this one, as you can tell. Baker Street itself, there was just a lot of people sitting on this bench, and I couldn't decide which one I wanted as the main subject until I saw this woman that was just kind of just looking at her phone. Um, and I just thought it worked quite well for me personally. And then I've added more people in on here, so you can see how many other people I've added on this. And then I've kind of started adding some adjustments on it. So that's kind of it. I hope that was helpful. I wanted to try and just give as many bits of just talk about, I suppose, a bit about my thought process in what goes to create these, and how I organize it. But then equally, I don't really organize it. I suppose what I'm trying to say is just I would really encourage everyone just to try and experiment with it first. If it's something you really want to try, experiment it. I do run one-on-one editing sessions, so if you've taken something that you want to then try and figure out what you can do with it, and you just want some advice and some pointers, I can offer half an hour and an hour sessions. I've done that with a couple of people in the past. They've generally found it quite helpful. Not so much for this type of thing, but just for Photoshop in general. But I use Photoshop in my day-to-day as well as this, so for me, I feel quite I've got quite a lot of experience in Photoshop itself. Yeah, so I do run those. So if anyone has taken photos and they want to try and figure out how they can do it, then and have kind of more of a personal one-on-one session, then I do those over Zoom. Uh, I've really appreciated the support that people have shown my Instagram page recently. I just want to say thanks to everyone that's followed me so far. And if you do want to see more of this, I am starting to release reels now. I took a while to get into reels, and I've actually started to um, use it as an opportunity to show how I construct some of these images. So if you're not following me already, maybe is the time to do so now. If you're generally thinking of getting into this a bit more and you want to try and see how those layers are built up, now might be a good time to drop a follow. Really appreciate all of the comments that I get. It's hugely encouraging for me. I get a lot of questions asked in the comments, so and I enjoy answering them. If I can inspire one person or two people or more, then for me, I'm very pleased I've been able to do that. And just finally, before I finish, I get asked about my setup. So for the setup on my images, so you can see kind of all of the ones I've taken here. The setup is incredibly simple, you'll be pleased to know. So I did go through the process of taking a tripod with me into London. I did go through the process of bringing my entire camera kit with me. Sometimes I will, depending on what kind of images I'm hoping to shoot to use for something like this. The more I've done, the more I now start to think about what my compositions might look like, just to try and elevate them a bit more. Um, Sometimes I don't. But my setup is incredibly minimal. I shoot with a um, Nikon D7200. It's a crop sensor. I believe it was advertised as their kind of semi-professional line of APCS cameras, or APS-C, sorry, cameras. So it's a 24 megapixel crop sensor. I'm really happy with the image quality on it. I'm really happy with the camera. Um, I used to take all my different lenses. I quite enjoy shooting with primes occasionally in this situation, depending on where I'm going. I love prime lenses. I think I'd encourage everyone to have one in somewhere, not just a 50mm, but I really do enjoy shooting with them. Um, but I will say that with a massive caveat that depending on where you go, um, a zoom lens of some kind is really helpful. So because I have a crop sensor, I have the 16 to 35, and that is a really sharp end-to-end lens for a crop sensor camera. If you've got one, it's a Nikon one. Uh, that's super handy for me because, again, you've seen kind of with a couple of the raw images. Well, I say raw, but the individual images is that it does vary in focal length. A couple of these I've done with the prime. So this one was done with the prime here. So um, this was uh, all a prime lens, and then the other ones that I've got in my collection here, this one wasn't done with the prime lens. So ultimately, my setup now is very simple. I tend to just go out with a very small camera bag that is just a shoulder one. The tripod I now will be taking with me, I trialed it over the weekend, is a compact tripod. Means I don't have to lug anything big around London. And yeah, I would just don't worry too much about your setup. Shoot with what you have. I have been tempted at some point to try it with just a standard pocket digital camera. Ultimately, for me, I love printing big images. So, um, to an extent, megapixels is important in that department. But equally, if you just want to try it and you're afraid of going out and looking like you're taking photos of people, then definitely look at trying it just with a small camera. Try it with your phone. Um, so yeah, thank you for listening. I realise it's 40 minutes. That's really not what I intended it to be. Hopefully it was helpful. I hope that you have taken something away from it. Um, as I said, I would hugely appreciate any support I can get on my Instagram page. I do try and share content now that shows how I create these. So if you are interested in that, if it's a line of photography that you're looking to get yourself into, do drop me a follow. I massively appreciate it. Hopefully, I can share more videos. And if you have got any questions, feel free to direct message me on my Instagram, where I do reply to them very regularly. Um, Thanks, everyone. Take care. I'll speak soon.